Well, I'm really happy to be joined by my good friend Nicki Neily today. Nicki and I have known each other for quite some time. It was actually back in 2005 in a general election in the UK. I think we first met, wasn't it, Nicki?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. So Nicki was involved in foreign interference. We didn't call it that back then, but technically now it would be foreign interference. And you also came and interfered in subsequent elections in the UK as well, right?
I did. I put things in people's mailboxes on your behalf, so
You did. Yes, thank
proud
you
to
for
help
that.
out.
And the last time was, of course, in 2019, where Nicki came over and helped in the 2019 general election on the mean streets of Scunthorpe. But it's not technically foreign interference, though, because you have an Irish passport, right? So Irish citizens can vote in the UK, so we'll let you off. But
Well, also, and then I got to tell people you were such a good candidate that I was compelled to come over from America.
yeah, exactly, this is true. Like, because there was literally nobody in the UK who was prepared to help. So we had to draft people in from overseas. But actually, when we first met in the 2005 election, do you remember we most bonded over that very screechy helper who was calling people up on election day, screaming down the phone at them, "We know that you know that it's election day." Anyway, but Nicki is much more famous for things other than helping some of my election campaigns and some of my neighbours. So really great to have you here today. Nicki is your president and CEO of Parents Defending Education. And you've been very active in think tank world for some time now. You're a senior fellow, previously worked for the Independent Women's Network, at the Cato Institute, and more importantly, also a Republican, this will shock people on our podcast that we've got somebody from the right of politics on. But look, we're really pleased to have you in today because we wanted to talk to. She's also got a really great personality and is just also very funny.
Oh, thank God.
Finally. Finally, yes. So we were struggling with just Joseph and myself, but also she's a good friend. So I really do appreciate and thank you for coming on today. We really want to pick your brains, not least because your involvement in Republican politics. You've actually even given evidence to Senate committees, but also because of your work in think tank, or what we would call wonk world. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That's great. Well, we'll probably just jump into it then. So we're a week into this new Trump administration. So I just wondered if maybe two starters for 10, as it were, anything that shocked you and anything that surprised you. And when I say shocked you, as in like if something happened that you didn't expect to happen, and has Trump failed to do something you did expect to see happen? So I don't know whether those are good starters.
Yeah, I mean, there has been just such a fire hose of activity. Honestly, it's like hard to keep up. On Sunday, I was flying back from Florida and I landed. I was just like watching a movie on the plane like an idiot. And I landed. I was like, oh my gosh, we just picked a war with Colombia. Cool, what's going on? And then apparently, like, by the time I was texting friends, like, what the hell is happening? It had like been resolved to the point that the Colombian president was like, also, you can use our presidential plane. And so, that was kind of unexpected. I didn't have that on my bingo card. And it's funny because thinking back over the past 4 years, Trump being off of social media, I think a lot of people kind of forgot how chaotic things were. And so I have like a non-trivial amount of PTSD at this point. But it's funny because it's coming at such a breakneck pace across all sectors that the Babylon Bee had an article a couple days ago. It said, exhausted media begs Trump to please like slow down or take a day off. And I kind of feel like that too. It's like, I can't even process what happened yesterday, much less like deal with the stuff that's coming out today. So
it really is insane.
Yeah.
I've taken this week off. I'm supposed to be on vacation, but obviously the podcast comes first. But I logged onto we have just our team space yesterday to look at, Andrew put in some notes for like our script for today. And I honestly, like eight of the 9 bullets, I had no idea what he was talking about because all 8 of those 9 bullets occurred yesterday when the 12 hours I decided I wasn't going to look at my phone because I was snowshoeing in the mountains. It's like, it is absolutely insane. Do you think this is going to be sustainable for, like, I wonder if sometimes it's just like first 100 days in office, you just really want to make a mark and you go, 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 go? Or do you think this is like potentially a sign of the times, like for the next 4 years?
I think it is probably a sign of the times. I mean, there was a joke kind of during the last Trump administration that it was infrastructure week every week because they would, Tom's team would have the best laid plans, and then he would pop off on Twitter in the middle of the night, and people would be like, all right, I guess we're talking about something else. And so we never actually got to infrastructure week, and I think that is happening as well. It's also, we're in a very dynamic geopolitical moment in time too, and so this admin, they might have some best laid plans. It does seem like the White House is more well coordinated this time than last time, but I mean, who knows, like, how Xi Jinping or Putin are going to react to some of the stuff that's been going on. The Middle East obviously continues to be an absolute tinderbox. And so who knows? But I don't think they're slowing down. I mean, I really think, frankly, the Republicans have had the past 4 years to kind of plan and strategize. And so I think there is a significant effort to make this a whole of government effort.
So we can get into some of the things that have been happening at breakneck speed, probably. But just before we do, is there anything that you thought you would have seen in this first week that we haven't actually seen from him?
I mean, I thought that we would already be in control of Greenland, quite honestly. I'm a little bit disappointed.
I did see a funny thing on Instagram the other day, which was like, how can Americans expect to take over Greenland when they had to move the inauguration inside because it was cold? But I just wondered if there's any policy area or anything that you thought you might have seen in the first week. But there's been so much happening, right? So I suppose it's hard to pick something that hasn't happened because so much has.
Yeah, I mean, there's taxes, there's tariffs, there's foreign policy, there's DEI, there's like everything. And to read the Wall Street Journal and other outlets right now, corporations are putting in place war rooms. I am on the university board of a public university in Virginia, and I emailed them and said, what is your plan to comply with these executive orders? I mean, everyone is scrambling. No one actually even really knows how this is going to impact them. Institutions are largely risk averse, and this is someone who came into office with a mandate to disrupt. And so I think there's going to be a lot of follow-up. There's going to have to be cleanup on some of his executive orders. And there's also obviously going to be a lot of litigation as people kind of realize that, like, whoa, like these unilateral actions about firing inspectors general. I mean, people are reading up over, what are these like laws from 1974 in the middle of the night, like, that he is citing. And so I think there's just, there is a lot going on.
Yeah, I think I read something the other day, which was yesterday. As I say, things happen so quickly. I can't remember, but it was in relation to the DEI stuff. It was, I think the U.S. military had taken down a video on the history of African-American soldiers because they were concerned it wouldn't comply with the new DEI provisions. And I guess this is the thing. If you're in business or if you're running any institution in the US, the ordinary way this works is you get a proposal, you wait for legislation, you watch it grind its way through the parliamentary legislative procedures, you know where you can apply pressure, you know where you're going to do your advocacy. But on these executive orders, there's such a liberal use of them, it's just impossible to fund, right? Because at the stroke of a pen, your entire world could have changed. And for somebody who makes so much of being in business and with a business background, you would think that perhaps he would understand that these are causing considerable costs and stress to the very people he wants to go out there and make America great again.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, though, President Obama was the one who said, look, I have a pen and a phone. When he couldn't get what he wanted through Congress, he just ended up using executive orders. And so he was kind of one of the early ones to weaponize this process. And as we saw under Biden as well, same thing. The absolute amount of lawless nonsense that came out of the Biden administration between the administration and even the morning of the inauguration when he pardoned his family.
Preemptive pardons.
Frankly, I don't think anybody has a leg to stand on to criticize Trump. I think that all the January 6ers should have been pardoned. I think that was, in my mind, that was treason. I don't like that. But it really weakens other people's hand to say, well, you're attacking, the institution of democracy when that has just happened for the past, 12 years.
Yeah, when you pardon your own son, right? And then you pardon, you don't exactly have the moral high ground.
Yeah.
So, no, it's interesting. So can you give us, you're down in the States, we're up here in what might be the state, we're not sure. Although Joseph and I do have a proposal to make the United States Canada's province. So we'll get onto that maybe a bit later.
Okay.
But how do you think Americans are generally responding to this first week? Because there was a poll by CBS which said I think a quarter of Kamala Harris voters were actually feeling positive about the future. So, is what he's doing not just satisfying the Republican base, but actually is a lot of it finding favor with a big section of Democrats, people who didn't actually vote for him?
Yeah, let's remember, Trump picked up a significant portion of minority voters, and even looking, when you dig into issue-by-issue polling, immigration was a real deal breaker for Democrats. People generally do not like open borders and criminals coming in, and that is what has happened for the past 4 years. On gender issues, even Democrats feel that a lot of the gender issues in schools have gone way too far. That was like an 80-20 issue, and so
Really?
For people to say, I mean, even looking at a Democratic representative from Massachusetts, Seth Moulton, who after the election said, you know what, like, I'm the father of two daughters. I don't want a boy on my daughter's sports teams. I think people, it's funny, the Journal had an article recently calling this America's Glasnost, where there's people sort of feel liberated to say the things that they have been thinking in their hearts for a long time, be it about, I'm not like the COVID stuff went a little bit far, or things like that. I think it's people, there is kind of on some level a sense of relief that people don't have to hold their breath and hold their tongue anymore. I do not expect that to continue. I think people are going to tire of his antics very quickly. But at this moment in time, I think some of the stuff that they have taken action on is actually a good thing. I mean, even on the anti-DEI front, to get back to a colorblind society, that is what Martin Luther King had promised. And what the Democrats have pushed in America over the past couple of years is absolutely the opposite of that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think that actually your point about how he has enabled people to say things that they were feeling. I don't think that's just across in the United States. I think that's actually across much of the Western world. Actually, that where you're suddenly seeing people saying things that they probably we whispered them in groups of friends who you can trust and say, well, actually, I think this has gone a bit too far. But people say, oh, you must never say that publicly because it'll be bad for your career. You'll get cancelled, you'll get doxxed, all the rest of it. Suddenly people are starting to say some of these things. And it's funny, there was a poll out, a big piece of research done in the UK in the last, just released in the last week, which, about young people and their thoughts. And actually, it showed this real divide, actually, with a big chunk of young men, particularly, who feel that this whole issue around race and around DEI has gone too far and that they are now being disadvantaged. So whilst they were committed to equality, they also feel as if now it's gone too far. And I think that people have been thinking these things. It's not like Trump made people think these things, right? It's that they've been thinking them, but they haven't felt the confidence to say it. For all of his, look, there are good and bad things that I think he's done so far, but actually he's giving people that agency now to actually say what they feel on a whole range of subjects. And
I mean, let's look at, Ibram Kendi said the solution to past discrimination is present discrimination. And so, I mean, you have seen, right, in different settings where, yes, we are actively, not admitting white boys to programs or things like that. I think that's kind of morally as well as constitutionally wrong. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to, hold people back. I was at an event recently, and somebody looked at the percentage of kids that are admitted to college, and right now it's like 60-40 females to men, who are going to college at this point. That's actually a wider gap than when Title IX was written in 1972. Wow. So I asked the presenter, I said, so does that mean we should strike down Title IX? And he kind of went pale. But, if you have laws to lead to equality, and then it not only gets to equality, but then kind of goes past the tipping point, at what point do we say, all right, mission accomplished? I know we in America have a bad, history with saying things like that prematurely.
Right.
But at what point do we start to say, all right, enough is enough. We're not going to meddle in this anymore.
No, I think that absolutely. And so it has been all done at breakneck speed, though, and the risk with that potentially is that it doesn't have longevity, right? If these things aren't thought through, you can very quickly get a very strong counter-reaction to some of this stuff, and that's what I guess, will have to be guarded against.
Well, even I wonder how much of that can happen within this term. I mean, you look at how Trump has, in the space of a couple of years, gone from position A on TikTok to position B on TikTok, a full 180. Circumstances change. I like this question, Andrew, around how rigid is what we're seeing these first couple of days. Is it it's a second mandate, a much larger mandate, much more convincing win? So no, this, he's got this agenda. He's sticking to it, come hell or high water. Or are we going to just see a bit of a transactional president who is looking for the next win, the next deal? And that means, whatever he says today, if circumstances change in 180 days, he can undo them. I think about tariffs, right? He struck a deal with Colombia, things can move. Can we in Canada, can we strike the right deal with him where, he said February 21, 25% tariffs across the board, but that was a week ago, and a lot can change in a week.
And just to add to that before perhaps answer, Nicki, is actually that the flipping 180, which people see as an inconsistency, and because it is, but people see as a kind of evidence of there is no underlying political kind of ideology or whatever to any of this. Actually, there was a really interesting piece by Justin Webb in the Times of London, which said that this is absolutely, and I wrote the quote down because I thought this was quite interesting, and Justin Webb's take on this was, it's keep 'em guessing elevated to high political style. In fact, more than that, it is actually substance. It is what Trumpism is. So, we all look at it, people can be tempted to look at this kind of, well, he might think this now, but in 180 days might think, but this is actually the essence of the political side. It is actually substance. It's just not what we're used to in politics, where traditionally somebody has a principle and a view and like they almost die in a ditch over it, even when it might be politically damaging to them. So I don't know, maybe this is the substance of it, right?
I mean, I think, he has delivered on a lot of the things that he was saying on the campaign trail, right? I mean, even down to freeing Ross Ulbricht, that Silk Road founder, which I personally think was a horrible idea, but my libertarian husband thinks is terrific. That was something that he promised when he spoke at the Libertarian Party convention. But it's funny because I think where people's brains are being scrambled right now is a lot of his policy priorities, initiatives don't line neatly up into the U.S. two-party system, right? I mean, Republicans always traditionally being, limited government, low intervention, pro-business, low taxes, et cetera, global engagement. And that has really scrambled people across the board. And I think that's, he has kind of remade the Republican Party in his own image. And we are now seeing that play out even in terms of staffing decisions that are being made now. Who is being frozen out, who is on the inside of various agencies. And, from RFK at HHS through to what's going on at the Department of Defense. I think people don't really know what to make of it, but I think there's a saying, you take Trump literally, seriously, but not literally. And, I think where people are sort of getting confused is they're taking him literally and not seriously.
Yeah, that's a really good
point. That's such a good line.
Yeah, it's a really good line. Obviously, after the inauguration of Trump 1.0, there were huge protests. There were lots of people on the street. People were outside Trump hotels, even all around the world. We've not seen that this time. So, what's your thinking on that? So why hasn't there been this? Or do you think it's because the margin of victory was bigger, or is it just we've seen it once before? So
yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely like a Dems in disarray thing going on right now, where people they're still kind of trying to figure out, like, they're doing their postmortem and trying to figure out why they lost, and half the Democratic Party is saying we didn't go progressive enough, and the other half is saying slow your roll, you're a little bit crazy pants. And so that's going to need to be sorted out among themselves. That's their problem. But I think beyond that, it's, there is, I think there's I think there's exhaustion, right? They're outraged about so many things at the same time. And, we have, Andrew, you and I have watched kind of the unicause, right? It's like the Palestinian, climate, abortion, trans people. Like, it's the same protesters doing all the things. I think they're stretched a little bit thin right now. But also, I feel like there's a non-zero amount of, like, this was Chicken Little. Like, you kept saying the sky was falling over and over and over again. And yet you have, Obama sitting there in the front row and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton there. Like, if the sky is falling, then why are you at the inauguration? What is going on here? And so I think this has really kind of shown that on some level, was this all smoke and mirrors? Was this all just kind of campaign nonsense? I don't know. But yeah, I think as of right now, kind of the loyal opposition seems to be kind of broken, which is fine, because I got really sick of just all the masks and like the protest signs around DC for like right after the 2020 election.
Right. Yeah. What was it you called them? The uni protester, because the same folks, right? They turn up, they just I think they have like a cupboard full of different flags, and they're like, oh, it's a Tuesday, it must be this one, right? So, almost like those Americans on road trips in Europe. If it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. If it's like Tuesday, it must be whatever particular vegan Wednesday or whatever cause it is. Not that there's anything wrong with veganism, just in case any of our listeners are vegans. Just want to be clear on that. But no, the how people are going to respond to that, I just because you can't just keep going around doing this.
I've been hearing some Democrats talking about how, okay, we don't need to stress out too much. He's already a lame duck president, or he's on the cusp of becoming a lame duck president. By the time he hits the 2-year mark, we're going to have midterms and sort of the usual cycle will kick in. I'd love your take on this, because I'm not convinced that that's the case, because I feel like whatever it is Trump represents, it doesn't necessarily need to have Trump as its figurehead, and that the MAGA movement can spread and others can sort of take the mantle as its choir of primary spokespeople. So I'm not convinced that he's a quote-unquote lame duck president, and it's really he's got a 2-year window before things turn against him. But, what do I know? I'd love your take on that, Nicki.
I mean, some representative just introduced some bill that, is going to remove term limits altogether. So this is anybody's guess at my
Right.
point in time. We might get Barron as like kind of the, next iteration of the Trump dynasty.
Right.
But yeah, I think there is going to be low-level jockeying over the next couple of years to sort of who is going to be the one that takes up the mantle. Will it be J.D. Vance that runs for president, or is it going to be Tom Cotton or somebody else? I think, there is still some fight left in the establishment Republicans who would prefer somebody more like Nikki Haley. How long is Marco Rubio going to be at the State Department? Is he a threat kind of from the more sort of establishment neocon wing? And so I think a lot of this is going to be, it's going to be kind of quiet and ugly over the next couple of years. And as you alluded to, the midterms are a big question mark because it's not a great cycle for Republicans to defend. About a third of the Senate is up every 2 years. And so they kind of go in cohorts. This past cycle in 2024 was one where Dems had to defend a lot of vulnerable seats. In 2026, the Republicans had to defend a couple vulnerable seats. And if people are pissed off about Trump overreaching, I mean, that could really impact how those Senate races go. It's funny, I have some friends who work for the Senate and they're like, we really like being in power. Like, we'd really like to not lose these nice offices after 2 years. And so I think, there is kind of just a practical element of how bombastic are you going to be in a way that doesn't jeopardize what's taking place? With Mitch McConnell stepping out of the Senate, he was the one who had kind of been, for a couple cycles, he was not very involved, or he had sort of been pushed to the sidelines in picking candidates. And there were some not great Republican candidates that lost races that frankly should have been won. And this past cycle, I think there was more discipline, but we'll see how that goes, because if they end up with some more kind of like Todd Aiken type candidates going forward, or like that Christine O'Donnell, I'm not a witch woman, they could very much snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
So you mentioned some of the folks around him, right? So you mentioned how the staying power of Marco Rubio. So what's your take on, we've already seen what's the Department of Government Efficiency? We've seen the
Doge,
that's it, Doge, Doggy or whatever it is. We actually, that sounds worse than I meant it to sound. But anyway, we've seen some movement there. So have these people got staying power? Do you think we're just going to see a cycling in and out of different faces? They're kind of like this. You keep them guessing. You're in 1 minute, you're out the next.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that is more likely, if past is prologue, I think it's likely that there is a little bit of an Icarus thing going on. So people who are hot and in the circle now are going to burn out. So I would not put my money on anybody staying in or staying close for a significant period of time, be that, the head of Doge or anyone else. It's also, it has been known for a long time, Trump doesn't like people taking credit for stuff.
Yeah.
And so to the extent, right, this is something that his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, has made very clear. There is not room for personalities or ego. And so to the extent where people claim credit or are being given credit for stuff, that works against them a lot. And so I think the hubris is going to end up catching up with a lot of people.
Okay. Interesting. I wanna ask an American then, Greenland.
Greenland.
Are you buying a second home there?
I like it, but only on the condition that we put casinos there and we have man versus polar bear races. And I will.
Right.
I think it's a money-making opportunity.
I mean, I think there may be a couple of issues with that, but we'll get somebody else on to talk about the polar bear racing issues, right? It's just political correctness gone mad, I'm sure, but there could be some issues. I guess again, this is one of the things where it more, the wider issue there is this whole issue around like Western defense, right? This is one of the things where you find yourself with Donald Trump as a conservative, as many of us do, I think, like kind of like being frustrated, but at the same time also occasionally going, yeah, actually quite right, because we got this whole issue where the West hasn't been investing in its defense. We know that here in Canada, especially. I think one of the very few countries I come from, obviously the UK, which is one of the very few countries to be maintaining it 2%, but suddenly he announced that it's got to be 5%, right? And we've been having this argument in the UK about going to 2.5% by 2030 or 2031, and all of a sudden Trump comes in and goes, oh, actually we want everyone to be at 5%.
Yeah, I can't believe. Where is Rachel Reeves going to come up with that money?
Well, I mean, she hasn't got any, largely because of her own decisions. But anyway, that's for another day. But actually, there's a real issue here, right? The West is not investing in its defence. We've all ridden on the back of basically American investment in defence for the last 60, 70 years. Not to say that lots of European and other countries haven't contributed in major campaigns and, sacrificed lives in so doing, right? But, he's onto something here, right? But the question is, like, does the Greenland stuff, does the whole, which I think he had that call with the Danish Prime Minister, which was described as horrendous. Actually, is it stupidity or is it brilliant? Because all of a sudden, what have we seen then? Canada here investing in border security and talking about defence. The Danes suddenly announcing billions of euros of investment in Greenland. All across Europe now, people are scrambling to say, well, actually, what are we going to do on defence? So, is it working?
I mean, I like it. I find it entertaining, but also I think big picture strategically, we have seen Russia make a significant play for the Arctic. There are tons of minerals in Greenland, and so it's not totally as crazy as it might seem off the top of, everybody's head.
Yeah, and it seems like years and years and years, everyone trying to talk in very polite ways and trying to do this the old way through typical institutions at the regular pace that you come to expect just doesn't work. Like, Russia doesn't care about institutions. And Trump, I said previously on the show, Trump is not my type of conservative at all. But, I mean, for fuck's sakes, he's getting people to react in a way they never reacted before. So if this is the style it takes to start getting movement on some of these big important issues, and global security is a big important issue, it's huge, especially for us in Canada, then fine. This style seems to be working, I think.
Yeah, and actually, you think like the people who, most play up to internationalism and global partnerships, the Democrats, they had the White House for all these years, and in that period, Western security retreated, right? We became weaker as a people. They were unsuccessful in convincing NATO allies to spend what they are committed to spending. But all of a sudden, this guy comes in bombastically, and everyone's now talking about and scrambling around saying, what can we buy? We should buy drones. And the problem with buying drones was, didn't we buy Chinese drones here in Canada recently to... It kind of defeats the object of this whole trying to improve our border security and general defence by, buying from really one of the greatest strategic threats to our way of life. However, I digress somewhat. But yeah, I think it's just the keep them guessing again, right? It does bear result. We got to talk the trade policy though, right? So, we saw the tariff threat against Colombia, which was kind of a bit icky for a whole set of reasons, because whatever we think about migration, it was involving human beings, right, and how they are transported and all the rest of it. But more generally, we got the threat of 25% on Canada. Do you think where do you think Americans are at on that?
Well, I mean, I have heard Canada described as the apartment above a really good party. So I don't think, I actually just saw today a map of every state, broken down by state, every state's largest trading partner. And for a lot of the country, it is Canada. And I think people don't recognize that. That being said, I think, right now Trump is benefiting from the fact that schools in America are terrible and nobody understands economics. And so people don't realize that, wow, a tariff is actually going to raise prices for me. Right? They think it's only going to hit the other guy and not them. And I think there is going to be a lot of cold water poured if/when any of this stuff actually takes effect.
But
when
I don't think presents under the Christmas tree are so much more expensive next year. I don't know. That starts to get tough.
I think it's just people they see sort of this kind of middle finger being given to the world, we're not going to be pushed around anymore, without really realizing what the second part of that is going to be.
Yeah, and I suppose it speaks to the kind of this Trump coalition he's built as well, right? Because most of us in the conservative movement thought we'd won the argument for free market. Decades ago, and you look through history, whether it's the Corn Laws and the pre-war stuff, the right goes through the cycle of flirting with tariffs and protectionism, and then we move. But we kind of thought in the 70s, 80s, whatever, we'd won these arguments around free trade. But actually, for a lot of the voter coalition that he's put together, particularly kind of blue collar workers, they are the people who that was a threat to. Right? So I don't know where this ends within the Republican movement then, because the more traditional Republicans who are in Congress, of which there are plenty, are very broad, very firmly on the side where we would be, which is generally, I would think all three of us on the free trade side. So, how does that resolve itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and we saw this kind of realignment taking place during the election when a lot of the unions refused to back Kamala Harris, right? Because Trump said, I'm with you, buy American, kind of the stuff, as you alluded to, that was, they were traditionally Democratic talking points. His nominee for labor secretary is someone who has been very, very pro-union to the point where even, members of the Senate are at this point uncomfortable. Republican members of the Senate don't want to vote for her because they consider her too union allied. So it's again, he was really meant it when he was going to prioritize America first. And when that impacts the economy, when prices rise, we'll see kind of how lasting support is for stuff like this.
Look, we've taken lots of your time. I don't know whether, Joseph, if you anything else you want to
Well, I had about 10 minutes additional questions, but we lost 10 minutes to your microphone not fucking working again.
I think we've got time, so go on, Joseph. I was just because I was worried about taking too much of Nicki's time, so...
No, I'm kidding. No, we've gone well
that's
past
why I'm
time.
back on I look like a student pilot, right? Because this doesn't work. So, you've probably imposed a tariff on this. You should impose a tariff on this, Nicki, because whatever it is, it's not working. So
I think it was a user issue.
I beg to differ, and I find that very offensive. You've met me. I've never done anything wrong, right? Come on. It's always somebody else's fault.
No, this has been extremely helpful. Thank you so much for helping us translate what's going on south of our border, and we are so appreciative of your time, Nicki.
Thank you for having me.